Hello, this is Charles Scoville, your Golden Harvest agronomist with your Agronomy in Action Focus Friday here on August the 16th, 2024. So I'm coming to you today from Fort Wayne, Indiana, as we wrap up our 2025 sales year kickoff meeting. It was actually great catching up with all of our Golden Harvest seed advisors and talking about crop progress across Michigan. I also spent 2 days at the Agro Expo just north of St. John's this week, talking to farmers and answering their agronomic questions in our booth there. It's just amazing how variable the weather patterns have been this year across the state and how that has affected the questions I've gotten this week. So we're going to talk through a number of them in this week's podcast. So let's get started. I'd like to start with the current MSU's Enviro weather site. That's showing us that our crop progress continues to be ahead of normal, but the cooler weather has brought us down to only about 3 to 5 days ahead of normal. So diving into the numbers, specifically that East Lansing site sits at 1,891 heat units. That's 54 heat units above the 5-year average. Going to West Michigan, we're 43 units above the 5-year average. Traveling down to southeast Michigan in the Deerfield, Blissfield area, up 77 heat units above the 5-year average. As we jump to the thumb, we are actually 78 heat units above the 5-year average, and rounding out to the north central area up in Ithaca, 82 heat units above the 5-year average. So again, about 3 to 5 days as we look to the weather patterns over the next week. Hot topics this week. They're going to include things like sudden death syndrome. We're starting to see that show up in soybeans. Southern rust is actually showing up in corn, and northern corn leaf blight in corn, plus a lot of Japanese beetles in the soybeans. So let's start with SDS, or sudden death syndrome. You know, walking those plots at the Agro Expo grounds, it's always pretty easy to identify SDS there each year. That soil just seems to be at risk of SDS, and then susceptible varieties tend to show up with the disease symptoms this time of the year. So, what are those symptoms, you ask? Well, you'll actually be able to easily see the dark green veins on those leaves of the soybean plant, and then you've got that dead brown tissue in the space between those veins on the leaves of affected plants. So the earlier you see these symptoms, the greater potential for yield loss from SDS. So in reality, the infection actually occurred weeks earlier in the spring. That was when that fusarium entered into the roots of the plant, oftentimes through holes left in the roots from soybean cyst nematode feeding. So this allows the fusarium to enter the plant, and of course by this time of the year that infection is showing up in the leaf tissue. Now, unfortunately, at this time of the year, there is no rescue treatment for sudden death. But there are some things that we need to consider for next time these fields go into soybeans. So for SDS-prone fields, let's consider a couple things. First of all, you will want to plant a variety with a good genetic tolerance to SDS. Now, if you look in the seed catalogs, your seed company should have ratings on all of the varieties for SDS tolerance. Secondly, you need to use a seed treatment that's specifically designed to manage SDS. Now, the idea is to kill that fusarium around the seed, which can delay the onset of SDS late enough into the growing season that its effect on yield is minimized. So I've actually personally seen SDS take 50% or more of the yield from a field when that infection comes in early and heavily across the field. So it is absolutely well worth managing for this disease in the future. But we need to be sure that the leaf symptoms are SDS. What you can actually find is that same leaf symptomology of green veins and necrosis or dead tissue between the veins is also a foliar sign of brown stem rot. So before just assuming that we have SDS out there, we're going to need to dig up some of those affected plants. And we need to check both the stems and the roots. So as far as the roots, What you'll often see is this bluish fungal growth on the roots, and that is a good indicator you've got SDS infection in those plants. Then all you do is take that stem. You need to take your knife and split that down the center, open that up, and look for the vein in the center of that plant. And usually down around the soil line is a good place to look. And if that vein is nice and clean and white and healthy looking, but the woody tissue on either side of it's got a little bit of grayish tint to it, you more than likely do have SDS. But if the center vein is brown, then you most likely have brown stem rot. And if you do have brown stem rot, the only real remedy is in that variety selection for future years. So, on a different topic, I received a photo of southern rust from a grower in southwest Michigan this week. This is one of those gifts we received from Hurricane Beryl, unfortunately, a few weeks ago. And this is a typically southern fungal disease that we only see when it's brought up here in the storms. But when it arrives, it too can have a negative effect on corn yields. So the good news is, if we're putting a fungicide treatment out there, that's going to help manage this issue too. But so if you've sprayed for tar spot, you've also protected yourself from rust. But if you've not yet sprayed, you probably should be scouting for this disease too. Speaking of spraying for tar spot, it was very interesting here to look back in some photos from 2018. That was kind of the first year of really bad tar spot. And we had a picture taken on August the 24th, which would be about a week from now. And that year, we were just starting to see tar spot show up in some fields pretty good. Now, by September 7th, just 2 weeks later, that year, we had dead fields, just brown canopies all the way around. And and knowing that tar spot likes temperatures in the 70s and like some moist canopy out there, this does make me concerned as we look at our 10-day outlook forecast, because we're seeing both rains and cooler temperatures coming at us. So my point is that we cannot get lazy on our scouting. If we haven't yet sprayed for tar spot and we are seeing lesions on our corn leaves and we've not yet started denting those corn kernels, there is still time to spray an effective multiple mode of action fungicide on these fields. Plus, while you're out there, be looking for other leaf diseases, including those kind of cigar-shaped lesions that we see with northern corn leaf blight, and those narrow lesions that kind of stay within the veins. Those are reminiscent of gray leaf spot. Remember, the worst yield losses over the past few years have been in those fields with multiple diseases all working on our corn plants at the same time. So finally, I am seeing a lot of Japanese beetle feeding on soybean leaves lately. Although their damage, that's the one that kind of creates that lacy look to the leaf there, and it looks horrible. But in reality, it's usually not enough feeding on these leaves to create a lot of real yield loss. So if you're already going over the field with a pass of fungicide or foliar fertilizer, including an insecticide on the trip, will definitely knock down this population and also knock down any bean leaf beetles that may be present. But remember, it'll also knock down all of your beneficial insects at the same time. So let's make this decision carefully. And also, though, keep in mind that these Japanese beetles that do reproduce and lay eggs, they're going to hatch next spring into white grubs out there. So, with that, I hope you've had a great week. Let's all keep our fingers crossed for a good rain over the next few days across the entire state. This could be one of those $1 million rains to help put the seed size on our soybeans that we desperately need for yield, and even to keep pushing that starch into our corn kernels to put the last few bushels in there. So again, this is Charles Scovel, your Golden Harvest Michigan agronomist with your Agronomy in Action Focus Friday. Have a great weekend.